The wind didn't just blow across the plains, it screamed. It screamed with the voices of the dead, tearing at the scorched fabric of what was left of her world. Elone stumbled, her feet catching on the blood-soaked earth, every step a war against an invisible force that wanted her to just lie down and die. It would have been easier. So much easier. Behind her, thick, greasy smoke clawed its way into the twilight sky. It was the funeral pyre of her life, her village, her family, her mother's laugh, her father's strong hands, her brother's teasing smile. All of it erased in a single afternoon of fire, thunder, and blood. The strange thing was, she hadn't made a sound. When the raiders came, there was no time for screams. There was only the earthquake of hooves, the crack of rifles that sounded like the world splitting open, and the wet final thud of bodies hitting the dirt. She had survived by diving beneath her brother Cale. She'd felt his last shuddering breath, his lifeblood soaking hot and sticky through her thin dress. She lay there, playing dead, while monsters on horseback swept through her home like a biblical plague. She didn't move, didn't breathe, her heart hammering a silent, frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drum beat only she could hear. She lay there for an hour, then two, long after the last gunshot faded into the vast, indifferent silence. When she finally pushed herself up, her world was gone. It was a canvas of ash and ghosts. The Lakota elders used to call these lands sacred, a place where the spirits walked. Today, it just felt cursed. Now, with the last light bleeding out of the sky like a fresh wound, Elone just walked. She had no destination, no plan. She only knew one thing. She couldn't stay. They would be back, the scavengers, the wolves. The two-legged kind were always the worst. She pressed a hand to her side, wincing at the deep bruises blooming beneath her skin. Every breath was a shard of glass in her lungs. Hunger was a living thing inside her, gnawing at her belly. Her feet were rubbed raw, her moccasins shredded. Her only possession was a small, broken-tipped knife she'd pulled from the cold, stiff hand of a fallen raider. A useless trophy from a war she had already lost. The first stars began to pierce the darkening veil above, cold, distant, uncaring. She remembered her grandmother's stories, whispered by the fire on cold nights, stories of the star people, the ancestors who watched from above, guiding the lost and the lonely. She tipped her head back, her throat tight, searching the infinite black for a sign, a whisper, anything to prove she wasn't the last person left alive. And that's when she saw it. A flicker of movement on the ridge overlooking the valley of her dead. It was small, deliberate. Her heart stopped. Then it kicked back into a frantic, panicked rhythm. Another raider, a scavenger coming to pick over the bones. She staggered backward, the broken knife trembling in her hand, feeling utterly, hopelessly small. A figure on horseback sat silhouetted against the bruised purple of the sky, as still and silent as a tombstone. He was watching her. The moment stretched, thin and brittle, ready to snap. Her mind screamed at her to run, hide, dig herself back into the earth. But her legs were frozen. She was done hiding. Then, without a sound, the rider nudged his horse forward. The animal began a slow, measured descent down the slope, its steps unnervingly quiet. Elone's knuckles were white, her grip so tight on the knife she thought her bones might crack. She was nobody's prey. Not anymore. If this was the end, she would meet it on her feet. She would die fighting. But destiny, it turned out, had a far more twisted game in mind. She had no idea. The rider drew closer, his shadow stretching long and distorted across the torn earth, swallowing her whole. His horse was a magnificent black beast, its mane tossing in the restless wind, its steps sure and silent. Elone held her ground, a statue of terrified defiance. She could see him clearly now. He wasn't one of the raiders she'd seen before. the ones with wild eyes and cruel faces. This man was a Lakota warrior, dressed in clean, soft buckskin adorned with intricate beadwork. His face was all sharp angles, carved from weathered stone, his expression impossible to read. His eyes were the darkest things she had ever seen, blacker than the spaces between the stars. He halted his horse a dozen feet away. The animal snorted, its warm breath misting in the cooling air. For a long, agonizing moment, they just stared at each other across the graveyard of her past. He made no move. His hands were resting calmly on the pommel of his saddle. He wasn't reaching for a weapon. He was just watching, waiting. Elone's breath was trapped in her throat. Then he spoke. His voice was low and even, but it cut through the sound of the wind like a razor. "You are alone." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a simple, terrible truth. Elone tried to answer, to say something, anything, but her throat was a knot of sand and fear. No sound came out. Her mind was a whirlwind of contradictions. Fight. Run. Stay. The warrior seemed to sense her turmoil. He swung a leg over his horse and dismounted in one smooth, fluid motion. He kept his hands open and visible, away from his body. It was a clear gesture of non-aggression. But she didn't trust it. Not for a second. He moved with the slow, weary patience of a man accustomed to dealing with frightened, wounded animals. Elone flinched as he took a step closer, but she didn't back away. She forced herself to stand tall, to be something more than the broken little girl who had survived by hiding under death. The warrior stopped. He reached into a small pouch at his belt. Elone's muscles tensed, ready to spring, but he didn't pull out a weapon. He withdrew a small piece of dried meat. Jerky. He placed it carefully on a flat, clean stone between them. Then, he stepped back, giving her space, his dark eyes never leaving hers. It was a gift, a peace offering. Her stomach cramped violently, the gnawing hunger screaming at her to take it. But suspicion was a cold poison in her veins. Was it a trick? Was it drugged? She'd heard stories of men who used kindness as a lure. The warrior didn't press her. He just waited, silent and patient as the night fell around them. The seconds dragged into minutes, each one an eternity. Finally, the desperate, trembling weakness in her limbs won out over the fear in her mind. She darted forward, a flash of movement, snatched the jerky from the stone, and scrambled back, putting distance between them again. She shoved the meat into her mouth, not even tasting it, her body convulsing with the simple, overwhelming relief of having something in her stomach. Tears of shame and gratitude stung her eyes. The warrior watched her, his expression unchanged. After she had finished, he spoke again, his voice even softer this time. "Come, you will not survive the night alone out here." She hesitated. Her every instinct screamed at her that this was a mistake. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. It was a currency that had been stolen from her people, paid for in blood. But then she looked at the endless, darkening plains, heard the distant howl of a wolf, and felt the profound, crushing weight of her solitude. Fear was a certainty. Following him was a chance. Slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, she took a single, hesitant step forward, and then another. She decided to follow. It was a choice that would save her life, and it was a choice she would come to regret more than anything in the world. The darkness was absolute. Elone followed the silent warrior across the battered landscape, a ghost trailing a shadow. Her steps were small and uncertain, every nerve in her body screaming at her to turn and run. But where would she run to? Death was behind her, and death was all around her. This man, this stranger, was the only thing that felt different. He walked ahead, never looking back, his tall silhouette a stark cutout against the faint starlight. He was her guide through a nightmare world that no longer felt real. She kept the broken knife clutched in her right hand, the cool metal a small, useless comfort. She knew it would be no defense against a man like him. If he chose to turn on her, she was finished. But he just kept walking, leading her away from the slaughter. He led her to a shallow hollow, a natural dip in the earth between two low hills, where they were sheltered from the relentless, biting wind. He motioned for her to sit, and then, without a word, he began to build a fire. His movements were a study in efficiency, precise, practiced, with no wasted energy. He was a man who lived in the wild, a man who understood it. Alone crouched at the very edge of the growing firelight, shivering uncontrollably, though it wasn't just from the cold. She watched him, studying every detail. The fire cast shifting, dancing shadows across his hard-planed face, making him look both dangerous and ancient. He had saved her, yes. But why? When the fire was crackling merrily, a small beacon of life in the immense darkness, he tossed a bundle of rough cloth toward her. It landed at her feet. A blanket, worn, but clean and whole. Another offering. She snatched it up and wrapped it tightly around her shoulders, its coarse texture a grounding reality against her fraying nerves. He ate a small amount from his leather pouch, then offered her another piece of dried meat. This time, she took it without hesitation, managing a hoarse, whispered, "Thank you." The night grew colder, the chill seeping into her bones through the tears in her dress. Pride and fear kept her from moving closer to the fire. She sat stiffly, wrapped in her blanket armor, stealing glances at the warrior who had materialized out of the wreckage of her life. Who was he? What did he want? The questions burned in her mind, but she kept them locked away. She had learned the hard way that a single question could get you killed. Trust was a trap. He finally broke the silence, his voice a low rumble that almost blended with the sigh of the wind. "You have a name?" She hesitated for a long moment, the name feeling foreign on her tongue, as if it belonged to someone else. A girl who was now dead. "Elone," she said, her voice dry as dust. He nodded once, his expression solemn. "I am Matau." The name hung in the air between them, a fragile thread connecting two strangers over a vast chasm of violence and loss. Sleep was a long time coming that night. She lay curled under the blanket, the fire a flickering shield against the encroaching dark. Her body ached, her spirit was raw, but her mind wouldn't shut down. It kept replaying the attack, the faces, the sounds. Yet, as the hours wore on, something strange happened. With Matau sitting on the other side of the fire, silent and watchful, a silent guardian, the tension in her body began to slowly unclench. Exhaustion finally dragged her down into a restless, dream-haunted sleep. She woke with a start just before dawn. The world was painted in shades of pale gray and muted gold. Matau was already awake, crouched by the dying embers of the fire. His back was to her, but he was utterly still, scanning the vast, empty horizon. He moved like a man who was constantly expecting trouble. Then she saw it. Something that made the cold morning air freeze in her lungs. On his horse's flank, partially hidden by the saddle blanket, was a brand, a small, stylized marking of a striking hawk. Her blood turned to ice. It was the same brand she had seen on the horses of the men who had slaughtered her village. Her mind refused to process it. It couldn't be. A coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. But in this new, brutal world she lived in, there were no coincidences. There was only cause and effect, action and reaction, predator and prey. And she had spent the night sleeping beside a predator. Every ounce of kindness he had shown her, the food, the fire, the blanket, it all curdled in her stomach. It wasn't kindness. It was a tactic, a deception. Had he been one of them? Had he participated in the slaughter and then felt a pang of guilt? Or was this something else? Something worse? Maybe he had come back to find the lone survivor, to finish the job. She watched him as he moved, her hand instinctively going to the broken knife tucked into her waistband. He was preparing the horses, not just his own magnificent black steed, but a second, smaller horse, a pinto. He saddled it with practiced ease, securing supplies she hadn't even noticed he had. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He was preparing a horse for her. Where was he taking her? To be sold? To be silenced permanently? He turned, his dark eyes meeting hers. He gestured toward the pinto. "We ride now," he said, his voice as calm and steady as ever. But now, that calmness felt sinister. It was the calm of a hunter who has his prey exactly where he wants it. Her survival instincts screamed at her to run, but he was faster, stronger, and he had a horse. Fighting him here and now was suicide. Her only chance was to play along, to wait for an opportunity, to learn what he wanted. So she swallowed her terror, stood up on shaky legs, and walked toward the horse. Her body was a tight coil of fear and adrenaline. She clumsily pulled herself into the saddle, her muscles protesting. Matau mounted his own horse with a grace that was almost insulting. He glanced back once, a quick, assessing look, to make sure she was following. Then he spurred his horse forward, heading west, away from the rising sun. They rode in silence, a fragile, terrifying procession. The only sounds were the creak of saddle leather and the soft thud of hooves on the dry grass. The brand on his horse was a burning image seared into her mind. The hawk. Its wings spread, its talons out, ready to strike. She had seen it on at least 3 of the raiders' horses. There was no mistake. He was one of them. Every step his horse took was a step deeper into enemy territory. She was his captive. She just didn't have any chains. Hours crawled by. The sun climbed higher, beating down on them. They stopped once to water the horses at a shallow, muddy creek. Ilone stayed in her saddle, watching Matau, her hand never straying from her knife. He seemed completely oblivious to her inner turmoil, or he was a master at pretending to be. As he knelt by the water, his back to her, she thought, "Now, this is my chance." She could spur the pinto, ride as fast as she could in the other direction. He would catch her, probably, but she had to try. Her hand tightened on the reins. She took a deep breath. "Don't," he said without turning around. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. It would be a mistake. She froze. How did he know? Could he read her mind? He stood up slowly and turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. "I know what you saw," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "The brand on my horse. So this was it, the confession, the moment the mask came off. It is the mark of the men you seek," he continued, his voice low and cold. "The men who destroyed your village. I know because I have been hunting them for 2 moons. I am not one of them. I am the man who brings them to justice." Her mind reeled. A hunter. Was it possible? Or was this just another, more elaborate lie? A way to keep her compliant until he got what he wanted? She didn't know what to believe. He was offering her a sliver of hope, but it felt like the bait in a trap. "They are a rogue faction," he explained, his voice tight with a cold anger. "Warriors who have betrayed their oath. They call themselves the Skyhawks. They kill without honor, and they take what is not theirs. I was tracking them when I found your village. I was too late to save your people. But I was not too late to save you." He took a step closer, his eyes intense. "They do not leave survivors. Ever. When their leader discovers you escaped, he will send men to hunt you down. They are out there now, searching. Our only chance is to keep moving. To get to a place of safety before they find us." Ilone stared at him, her heart a battlefield of warring emotions. Fear, suspicion, and a desperate, foolish flicker of hope. He sounded sincere. The anger in his voice felt real, but the brand was still there, a symbol of death. "Why should I believe you?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Matao's expression softened for the briefest of moments, a flicker of something that looked like pity. "You have no reason to," he said simply. "But I am all you have." He was right, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. They rode harder after that. The conversation, if you could call it that, had changed everything. The silence between them was no longer just empty space. It was filled with unspoken questions, with the heavy weight of her doubt and his grim purpose. Was he a hunter, or was he a wolf in shepherd's clothing? Every time she looked at him, she saw both. He pushed them relentlessly, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, a hawk searching for other hawks. He explained that the Sky Hawks were led by a man named Korak, a warrior known for his brutality and his greed. They weren't just raiders, they were mercenaries, loyal only to the highest bidder. Matao claimed he was part of a special council of warriors, a lawkeeper sworn to hunt down those who broke the sacred codes. It was a good story, a believable story, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving something out. There was a piece of the puzzle missing, and she had a terrible feeling that she was that piece. Late the next afternoon, they came upon another scene of devastation. It was a smaller settlement, a trading outpost, and it had been hit just as brutally as her village. Charred timber frames clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers. The smell of cold ash and death hung heavy in the air. Elon's stomach churned, the fresh grief of her own loss rising like bile in her throat. She stayed on her horse, unable to bring herself to get any closer. But Matao dismounted. And he did something strange. He wasn't just surveying the wreckage with a grim expression. He moved with a frantic, desperate energy. He went from body to body, his jaw set, his eyes searching. It was deeply unsettling. He wasn't just looking for clues about the killers. He was looking for something specific. An object. He moved to the body of a small child, lying near a burned-out wagon. He knelt, his movement surprisingly gentle, and pried something from the child's clenched fist. He stood up, turning it over in his palm. From her vantage point, Elone could see it was a small, crudely carved wooden bird. He stared at it for a long moment, his face a mask of what looked like disappointment, frustration. Then he quickly pocketed it and turned away. "What was that?" Elone called out, her voice sharper than she intended. "What are you looking for?" Matao walked back to his horse, his face once again an unreadable shield. "Nothing," he said, swinging himself into the saddle. "Just seeing what they took." It was a lie, a blatant, obvious lie. Her blood ran cold. This changed everything again. The Skyhawks weren't just killing for sport or plunder, they were searching for something. And Matao was searching for it too. What was it? Some kind of treasure? A sacred relic? And why wouldn't he tell her? The web of deceit was growing thicker, more complex, and she was caught right in the center of it. "We need to go," he said, his voice urgent. They were here only a day ago. They could still be close. He didn't have to tell her twice. She spurred her horse, following him as they rode away from the second graveyard. The little wooden bird was a burning question in her mind. Whatever this secret was, people were dying for it. And she was riding with a man who was deeply, dangerously involved. Her savior was looking more and more like a player in a game she didn't understand, a game where her life was just another piece on the board. They rode until dusk, finding shelter in a rocky outcropping surrounded by stunted, twisted trees. The air was heavy with the promise of a storm. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low growl from the belly of the earth. As Matao built a fire, his movements were tense, distracted. He kept glancing over his shoulder into the darkness, as if expecting company. Elone huddled under her blanket, the broken knife in her hand. The trust she had tentatively started to build had evaporated. He was a liar. He was hiding something vital. "The bird," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "The one you took from the dead child. What is it?" Matao stopped what he was doing. He looked at her across the flickering firelight, his dark eyes seeming to pierce right through her. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the crackle of the flames and the distant thunder. She thought he was going to lie again, to dismiss her question. But then he sighed, a deep, weary sound. "It is a token," he said, his voice low. "A marker. The Skyhawks are not just raiding. They are on a mission from a client. They are looking for something. Something that was hidden in one of these settlements." "What?" she pressed. "What are they looking for?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the fire. "A map," he finally said. "An old map. It leads to a place of great power, a place that must not be disturbed. My people believe your village was the last known guardian of that map." Alone's heart skipped a beat. A map? Her people were simple farmers and hunters. They weren't guardians of ancient secrets. Or were they? Had her elders kept this from the rest of the village? "They believe the map was passed to a survivor," Matau continued, his eyes lifting to meet hers again. The intensity in his gaze was terrifying. "They believe that survivor is you." The world tilted on its axis. Suddenly, it all made a horrific kind of sense. Why she was the only one left alive. Maybe the raiders hadn't missed her. Maybe they had let her go, assuming she would lead them to what they wanted. And Matau. He hadn't found her by chance. He had been looking for her. Not to save her, but to get to the map before the Skyhawks did. She wasn't a survivor he was protecting. She was an asset he was securing. A key. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "To my village," he said. "It is the only safe place left. The elders there will protect you. They will know how to keep the map safe from Korak and his men." Safe. The word sounded like a curse. She felt a profound, chilling certainty that his village was the last place on earth she wanted to go. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was her destination, her cage. The journey to Matau's village felt like a funeral procession. The revelation about the map had shattered the last fragile remnants of trust between them. Elone rode in a state of numb dread. She was a pawn in a deadly game, and her supposed protector was just another player moving her across the board. Every kind word he'd spoken, every gesture of protection, was now tainted by the ugly truth of his motive. He wanted the map. He tried to talk to her, to explain that his people, the Silent Arrow tribe, were the sworn enemies of the Skyhawks and had been trying to stop them for years. He told her the map led to the Valley of the Sleeping Gods, a place of immense spiritual power that Korak would desecrate for profit. He painted a picture of a noble struggle, with himself as a hero fighting to protect the sacred. But Elone didn't hear the words. She only heard the lie underneath them. He had used her, manipulated her fear and her grief. He had let her believe he was a savior when he was just a treasure hunter with a better story. After 2 more days of relentless travel, they reached a narrow valley carved by a silver stream. Tucked against the shelter of a steep, sheer cliff face was a village. Hide-covered lodges were arranged in neat clusters, and smoke curled lazily into the afternoon sky. It looked peaceful. It looked safe. And that terrified her more than anything. Matau slowed his horse, turning to her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Was it reassurance, or was it a warning? "We are here," he said. "You will be safe now." They rode into the village, and the people stopped what they were doing to stare. Children paused their games. Women tending cooking fires looked up, their faces curious. Warriors emerged from the shadows between the lodges, their arms crossed, their gazes sharp and questioning. This was not the welcome of a long-lost son returning with a rescued soul. This felt different, colder. A tall, imposing man stepped forward to greet them. His face was a mask of stern authority, his hair braided with the feathers of a hawk, the same hawk from the brand. He was the chief. Matau spoke to him in their native tongue, the words low and rapid. The chief's hard eyes flicked to Alone, studying her with a piercing, unnerving intensity. It wasn't a look of pity or concern. It was a look of assessment, like a buyer examining goods. She straightened her back, refusing to shrink under his gaze. She had survived fire and blood. She would not be intimidated by a hard stare. After a moment that stretched for an eternity, the chief gave a single, curt nod. He gestured for them to dismount. As Elone's feet touched the ground, her legs trembling from exhaustion and fear, she knew with icy certainty that her journey had not ended. It was just entering a new, more dangerous phase. The chief spoke a command, and 2 warriors stepped forward. They didn't touch her, but their presence was a clear message. She was a prisoner. Matau avoided her eyes. He had the decency to look ashamed, but it was cold comfort. He had led the lamb to the slaughter. They guided her not to a family lodge, not to a place of healing, but to a small, isolated lodge at the edge of the village. The chief gestured for her to enter. She hesitated at the doorway, a primal fear seizing her. Matau finally looked at her, his face etched with conflict. "Go," he whispered. "It is the only way." She stepped inside. The lodge was bare, empty except for a pile of furs in the corner. It was clean, but it felt cold, sterile. The flap of the lodge was closed behind her, and she heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy wooden bar being dropped into place. She was locked in. Panic clawed at her throat. She scrambled to the door, pounding on the thick hide with her fists. "Let me out! Matau, let me out!" There was no answer, only the muffled sounds of the village outside, indifferent to her plight. She was a captive. Matau hadn't saved her. He had delivered her. His village wasn't a sanctuary. It was a prison. And the elders he spoke of weren't protectors. They were her jailers. She sank to the dirt floor, the full weight of the betrayal crushing her. She had escaped one monster only to be led into the den of another. She was alone, trapped, and at the mercy of people who believed she held a secret worth killing for. A secret she didn't even have. As darkness fell outside her prison, she realized the terrible truth. The Skyhawks might have been the ones to burn her world down, but it was Matau who had just sealed her tomb. Hours bled into one another in the dark, suffocating confines of the lodge. Elone's panic slowly cooled into a hard, cold knot of rage. Rage at Matau for his lies, rage at the chief for his cold cruelty. But most of all, rage at herself for being so foolish, for daring to hope. Sometime late in the night, the bar on the door was lifted. Alone scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding, her hand gripping the broken knife. The flap was pushed aside, and an old woman entered, silhouetted against the moonlight. She was one of the elders who had been standing beside the chief when they arrived. Her face was a road map of deep wrinkles, her eyes small and sharp like chips of obsidian. She carried a small bowl of water and a piece of bread, which she set on the floor. She didn't speak. She just watched Elone with an unnerving, predatory stillness. Then, with a speed that belied her age, she lunged. Elone cried out as the woman's surprisingly strong hands grabbed her, patting her down, searching her clothes, her hair, her boots. "Where is it?" the woman hissed, her voice a dry, rasping whisper. "Where did you hide it?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Elone gasped, struggling against her grip. "The map!" the old woman snarled, her fingers digging into Elone's arm. "The map of the sleeping gods. The elders of your village were its guardians. They were fools to think they could keep it from us. Korak was a clumsy instrument, but he served his purpose. He cleared the field. Now, you will give us what is ours." The words hit Elone like a physical blow. He served his purpose. Korak, the leader of the Skyhawks, this chief, this tribe. They weren't the enemies of the Skyhawks. They were their employers. They had hired the mercenaries to slaughter her people, to slaughter everyone in those settlements, all to get their hands on this mythical map. The entire story Matau had told her was a lie. A carefully constructed fiction designed to lead her here. He wasn't a lawman, he wasn't a hero, he was a retriever, a dog sent to fetch a prize. His kindness, his protection, his feigned conflict, it was all an act, the most brutal betrayal of all. "I don't have it!" Elone cried, tears of rage and despair streaming down her face. "My people were farmers. They didn't have any secret map." The old woman sneered, unconvinced. "Lying will not save you. We know it was tattooed on the back of the elder speaker. We know he passed the knowledge to you before he died. We will get it, one way or another." She released Elone, shoving her backward onto the dirt floor. "The chief is patient," the woman said, her voice dropping to a menacing calm. "But his patience has limits. You will tell us what we want to know." With that, she turned and left, the bar sliding back into place with a sound of absolute finality. Elone lay there, trembling, her mind a maelstrom of horror. She was trapped in the heart of the conspiracy. These people were the true monsters. Korak and his skyhawks were just their bloody instruments, and Matau was the most despicable of them all because he had worn the face of a friend. She curled into a ball on the furs, a wave of hopelessness washing over her. There was no escape. No one was coming to save her. She was going to die in this dark, cold lodge, killed for a secret she did not possess. She pulled the blanket around her, the one Matau had given her. It felt like a shroud. Her hand brushed against the other gift he had given her, the second knife, the one with the worn leather grip. She pulled it out, staring at it in the dim light filtering through the smoke hole in the roof. It was a mockery, a symbol of his ultimate deception. She ran her thumb over the smooth, worn leather of the hilt, feeling the intricate carvings beneath her skin. They were just decorative patterns, swirls and lines. But then her thumb brushed over a small, raised nub near the pommel. It didn't seem like part of the design. It was a small, perfectly round bump. Curiosity, the last flicker of her defiant spirit, took over. She pressed it, hard. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, she heard a faint click. She looked closer. A thin line had appeared on the side of the hilt, a seam. Using the tip of her broken knife, she carefully pried it open. It wasn't a solid hilt. It was a hollow compartment, and inside, nestled in a bed of dried moss, was a tiny, tightly rolled piece of parchment, no bigger than her little finger. Her hands trembled as she unrolled it. It wasn't a map. There were no lines, no rivers, no mountains. It was a list of names and dates and locations, and at the very top of the list, written in a neat, precise hand, was a single name, Chief Akando, the man who had imprisoned her. Beside his name was a symbol, a striking hawk. This wasn't proof of his guilt. This was his signature. The world swam before Elone's eyes. This list, it changed everything. Again. This knife wasn't a mockery. It was a message, a desperate, hidden message. But from who? And what did it mean? Was this a list of the chief's victims or his conspirators? She stared at the parchment, her mind racing, trying to piece together a puzzle where none of the pieces fit. The door bar lifted again. She shoved the parchment back into the hilt, snapping it shut just as the hide flap was pushed aside. It was Matau. He stepped inside, and this time the flap was left open behind him. He looked haggard, his face etched with exhaustion, and an emotion she couldn't name. Guilt? Regret? "I'm sorry," he said, his voice a low, pained whisper. "I never wanted this for you." "Sorry?" Elone spat the word at him, her voice dripping with venom. She scrambled to her feet, the knife held tight in her hand. "You lied to me. From the very beginning. You're one of them. You work for that monster." "No," he said, taking a step back, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "It's not what you think. Akando, he's my uncle, the chief. And yes, he is a monster. He is the one who hired Korak. He is the one who has been selling out our people, our sacred lands, to outsiders for profit. He is a poison that has infected our tribe. Alone stared at him, bewildered. Then what are you? His loyal dog? I am the one trying to stop him, Matau said, his voice raw with conviction. There is a council of elders, men and women of honor within the tribe, who have suspected him for years. But we had no proof. Akando is clever. He is feared. No one would speak against him without irrefutable evidence. The man who wrote that list, he was my friend. An elder who served Akando, who saw the truth and risked everything to document it. He hid his evidence, telling me only that he had entrusted it to the last survivor of the next massacre Akando ordered. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw not deception, but a desperate sincerity. He meant he hid it on one of the bodies for me to find. He never imagined there would be a living survivor. When I found you, I thought you were just a witness, a complication. My plan was to bring you here, to keep you imprisoned but safe, under the guise of interrogating you. It was the only way I could protect you from Akando and his guards while I continued to search for the proof. I never dreamed. He hid it with you. In the knife. It was an insane story. A wild, unbelievable tale of a conspiracy within a conspiracy. But as she looked at him, at the anguish in his eyes, at the way his hands trembled slightly, she felt a sliver of truth in his words. Could it be possible? Was he not her betrayer, but her secret protector? The list, she whispered, her hand protectively covering the hilt of the knife. What is it? It's everything, he said, a flicker of hope in his eyes. It's Akando's ledger, a record of every deal he's made, every tribe he's betrayed, every life he's sold. It's the proof the council needs to depose him and bring him to justice. That list is the key to ending his reign of terror. He took a cautious step closer. Elone, I know I have given you no reason to trust me. I have lied to you. I have frightened you. But every lie was meant to keep you alive until I could find that proof. Now you have it. You are no longer just a survivor. You are the witness, the judge, and the jury, all in one. But holding that proof makes you the most dangerous person in this village. Akando will not let you live if he discovers what you have. The implications crashed down on her. If he was telling the truth, they were both in mortal danger. They were trapped in a village run by a tyrant, surrounded by warriors loyal to him. What do we do now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Matau's face hardened, his expression shifting from one of pained confession to grim resolve. Now, he said, his eyes glinting in the dim light, we fight our way out. The village was asleep. A false, fragile peace settled over the lodges, belying the venom coiled at its heart. Matau moved with the silent grace of a shadow, leading Elone through the darkest paths between the dwellings. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of the wind sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through her veins. They weren't just escaping a prison now. They were fugitives carrying a death sentence. The horses are at the western edge of the village, Matau whispered, his breath clouding in the cold night air. Akando's personal guard watches the main gate. We have to go through the ravine. It was a treacherous path, a narrow, rocky scar in the earth, but it was their only chance. They moved slowly, cautiously, their feet finding purchase on the loose stones. Elone's heart was a wild drum against her ribs. She clutched the knife with the hidden list, the small weight of it a terrifying burden. It was their only hope and their greatest liability. They were halfway down the ravine when they heard it. A sharp whistle from the cliffs above, then another, answering from the direction of the village. They had been discovered. Go! Matau yelled, shoving her forward. Get to the horses! I'll hold them off! Figures appeared on the ridge above them, silhouetted against the moon. Warriors. Akando's elite guard. An arrow hissed past Elon's head, thudding into the dirt beside her. Panic seized her, and she froze. Matau grabbed her arm, his grip like iron, and pulled her behind a large boulder. "You cannot freeze!" he commanded, his voice harsh but not cruel. "You are a survivor. Remember that! Now run!" His words broke the spell of fear. He was right. She had survived worse than this. She scrambled out from behind the rock, her feet flying over the treacherous ground. Arrows rained down around them, chipping off shards of rock that stung her cheeks. She could hear the sounds of a struggle behind her, the clash of steel, a pained grunt. She didn't dare look back. She just ran. She reached the bottom of the ravine and saw the horses, tethered in a small hidden copse of trees, her pinto and Matau's powerful black steed. She fumbled with the knots on the reins, her fingers clumsy with fear. She freed her horse and was just about to pull herself into the saddle when a figure emerged from the trees in front of her. It was one of Akando's guards, a hulking man with a cruel sneer and a massive war club in his hand. He stalked toward her, a predator cornering its prey. Alone backed away, her hand going to the knife Matau had given her. The list. She couldn't let him get the list. She drew the blade, its polished steel glinting in the moonlight. Her hand was trembling, but she held it steady. "Give me the knife, girl," the warrior grunted, advancing on her. "The chief will reward me for your head." This was it. No more running, no more hiding. She thought of her village, of her family, of the countless others this man's chief had murdered. The fear inside her burned away, replaced by a white-hot, cleansing fire of rage. "You'll have to take it from me," she said, her voice low and steady. He laughed, a short, ugly sound, and lunged. Alone didn't think. She reacted. She sidestepped his clumsy charge, just as Matau had taught her to anticipate an opponent's weight. As he stumbled past, she drove the knife with all her strength into the soft spot under his arm. He roared in pain and surprise, staggering backward, the war club falling from his grasp. He stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief, before collapsing to the ground. Elone stood over him, breathing heavily, the bloody knife in her hand. She had killed a man. But she felt no remorse, only a grim, terrible satisfaction. Just then, Matau appeared, emerging from the ravine. He had a deep gash on his arm, but he was alive. He saw the dead guard at her feet, and then looked at her, his eyes filled with a new kind of respect. "We have to go. Now," he said, wasting no time. They mounted their horses, Matau wincing as he pulled himself into the saddle. They spurred the animals into a gallop, bursting from the trees and onto the open plains, leaving the village of lies and death behind them. The hunt was on, but as they crested a hill, they saw them. Torches. Dozens of them. Spreading out from the village in a wide net. Akando had sent every warrior he had. They were cut off. Trapped. There was nowhere left to run. They were cornered. A ring of fire and steel was closing in on them from all sides. Matau pulled his horse to a halt at the edge of a sheer cliff, the plains falling away into darkness below. To their back was a dead drop. In front of them, the army of a tyrant. "This is the end of the line, Matau," a voice boomed through the night. Chief Akando rode forward from the ranks of his warriors, his face a mask of triumphant fury. "Traitor! You would betray your own blood for an outlander girl?" "You are not my blood," Matau called back, his voice ringing with defiance, though Elone could see him clutching the wound on his arm. "You betrayed our people the day you sold their honor for gold." Akando laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound. "Honor doesn't feed a village. Power does. Strength does. That map would have made us kings, and you threw it all away." He turned his cold, reptilian gaze on Elone. "And you, girl, you have caused me a great deal of trouble. I was going to give you a quick death. Now, I will take my time." His warriors raised their bows, the tips of their arrows glinting in the torchlight. This was it. The final moment. Elone looked at Matau, his face grim and pale in the flickering light. They had failed. She closed her eyes, a strange sense of calm washing over her. She thought of her brother Kyle. She was about to join him. But she would not die a victim. She would die a warrior. She opened her eyes and met Akando's stare, her expression one of pure, unadulterated hatred. But then, something happened. A new sound joined the howling of the wind, a low, rhythmic drumming, hoofbeats, hundreds of them, coming from the east. Akando's head snapped around, his expression of triumph turning to confusion. From over the rolling hills, a new line of riders appeared. They were not carrying torches. They moved in disciplined ranks, their silhouettes stark against the pre-dawn sky. They carried the banners of 3 different tribes, the Horse Runners, the Stone Bears, and the River People. They formed a second ring, a circle of silent, deadly warriors, trapping Akando and his men between them and the cliff. Matau looked at Elone and gave her a weak, grim smile. "I told you the council had been watching him," he said, his voice strained. "My friend, the one who wrote the list. He sent out more than one message before he died. He sent riders to the allied tribes. He told them to wait for my signal." He held up his uninjured hand. On his wrist was a leather band with a small, polished piece of obsidian tied to it. It was catching the first rays of the rising sun, sending a tiny, flashing signal eastward. He told them to come when they saw the sun rise on the stone. Akando stared at the arriving armies, his face turning ashen. His own warriors looked around, their confidence faltering as they found themselves hopelessly outnumbered. An old, wizened chief from the Horse Runner tribe rode forward, his gaze falling on Akando with the weight of judgment. "Akando of the Silent Arrow," the old chief said, his voice like the rumbling of stones. "You have been accused of treason against the land and the people. You have spilled the blood of our cousins. You have broken the sacred pacts. How do you answer?" "Lies!" Akando screamed, his composure finally cracking. "The girl is a witch. Matau is a traitor. They conspire against me." "Then you will not object," Eloan's voice cut through the air, clear and strong, "to showing them what is written on this." With all eyes on her, she pulled the knife from her belt. She worked the catch on the hilt and slid out the small rolled parchment. She held it up, the tiny scroll looking so fragile, yet holding the power to topple a king. "This is no lie," she said, her voice ringing with the authority of the wronged. "This is your own ledger, Akando, written in your own hand, a list of your crimes." A murmur went through Akando's men. Their loyalty to him was built on fear and greed, not honor. Seeing the proof, seeing the armies of the allied tribes, they saw the tide turning. They began to lower their weapons, backing away from their disgraced chief. Akando was alone. He looked from the list in Elone's hand to the stone-faced warriors surrounding him, and he knew he was finished. With a final desperate roar of rage, he spurred his horse not at the allied tribes, but directly at Elone. He would take the evidence and the witness with him to the grave. But Matau was faster. He threw his own horse in front of Elone's, intercepting Akando's charge. The 2 men and their mounts crashed together in a tangle of fury. Matau, weakened by his wound, was thrown from his horse. Akando raised his spear for the killing blow, but he never delivered it. An arrow, then 2, then a dozen, sprouted from his chest and back. His own men, their last shred of loyalty broken, had delivered their judgment. Akando stared up at the sky, a look of profound surprise on his face, before toppling from his horse and falling lifeless to the dirt. Silence descended upon the plains. The sun was rising, bathing the scene in a clean, golden light. It was over. Elone slid from her horse, rushing to Matau's side. He was breathing, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at her, and then at the body of his uncle, and a single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. Justice was a heavy and complicated thing. The old chief of the horse runners dismounted and approached them. He looked at Elone, his ancient eyes filled not with pity, but with a deep, profound respect. He took the scroll from her trembling hand and held it up for all to see. "The spirits of the dead will sleep now," he said. "Justice has been done. The girl who survived the fire has brought the cleansing rain." Elone stood there, on the edge of the world, the morning wind whipping her hair. She was no longer a victim. She was no longer a pawn. She was the spark that had started an inferno of justice. She had lost everything, but in the ashes, she had found something she never knew she had, a strength forged in fire and a purpose written in blood. The past would always be a part of her, a landscape of ghosts and sorrow. But for the first time, the future was not a terrifying void. It was an open plain, vast and full of possibility, waiting for her to choose her own path. The story of the girl who survived the Skyhawks and brought down a corrupt chief would be told around campfires for generations. A story of how even the smallest, most broken soul can find the strength to change the world. If you were on the edge of your seat with this story of betrayal, survival, and ultimate justice, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss the next tale we uncover from the darkest corners of history. And let me know in the comments. At what point did you realize Matau's true secret?